10 things you need to know before bringing home a snake. Number one, are you allowed? If you're young, are your parents okay with you bringing home a snake? Make sure that you're allowed before buying a snake. This rule applies to people that are also breeding snakes and selling them. Don't sell a snake to someone that's minor, not allowed to have it, or not sure that they want to keep it, because that would just be... In general, when you buy an animal, understand that there's no like returning. You don't just get to buy an animal, bring it home, and return it to the store if you don't want to. So it's something really serious to consider. Are you going to be allowed to keep it? Are your parents going to be okay with it? Is it going to be allowed where you live? And just consider that. On to number two. Have you researched the requirements? You might think it'd be great to have a pet snake, or any pet for that matter. I've always wanted sugar gliders, but any animal that I'd want to bring into my house as a pet, I'd do some research and figure out, is this something that I can actually keep? Am I going to be able to give it all the requirements that it needs before buying that animal? So every snake has kind of different requirements, even though lots of them are similar, but do specific research on that animal that you want to get. Especially like you're considering getting a pet here that's going to live for maybe 30, 40 years. Know everything about this animal. You should be excited about it, and learning about it should be something that you enjoy. Number three, do you have a home for it? So many people buy snakes kind of on a whim, and it's not an animal to just buy on a whim. You need to have the proper home for it, and this is not a glass tank. Can you make a glass tank work? Yes, you can, but glass tanks are the least preferred home for a snake. There are many reasons for this. First, it's hard to get the right humidity. Second, when you have these snakes and they touch the glass, if the glass in the room is cold or the glass in the room is hot, but more often the glass might be cold because they don't insulate. So you are in a room made out of glass. Just imagine you put yourself up against that glass, and the transference of the coldness goes to your body. Whereas if you're in a room made out of wood or PVC, you put your body against that, and you're not going to have that temperature that just kind of goes through it. So you want to have a home that's able to kind of insulate the temperature for them, control and kind of maintain temperatures that you're going to need inside the home. You also don't want it to be super dry, and in glass tanks, that tends to happen quite a bit. It really stinks because so many companies are selling people these glass tanks as something to set their snake up. One of the best homes that you can actually give a snake starting off or even later on is using Tupperware. You can get bigger ones as the snake gets bigger, and if you want to get them something really nice and big during Christmas time, the Christmas tree boxes, those things are like $40, and that's going to give a much better home for your snake than a $200 aquarium would. Consider that. It might not look as nice, but on the cheap, one of those big Christmas tree bins is going to be much better for you than an aquarium. And then if you have the funds or have the time, go to Home Depot, build yourself one out of wood. Make sure that you make it waterproof, make it like a project, or get a PVC one. PVC homes are really beautiful, and they keep the humidity in well. They don't start warping and stuff. They're pretty waterproof. Everything about PVC is great, except that they can be pretty expensive. Number four, if you're gonna have an elaborate setup for your snake, make sure that you get it all set up before the snake comes. So you got your home, you know what you want to keep them in, but let's say you want to do something like bioactive. So if you have a small snake, kind of like a African house snake, which is awesome, or a king snake, you still can mess around with bioactive enclosures. If you're keeping a boa, it's a lot harder unless you have space like a zoo. But most of us don't have that, and it's understandable that it's pretty difficult to set up a bioactive enclosure for a boa, because anything that you set up, little branches and whatever, they're going to crawl all over it and destroy it. But if you are going to set up a bioactive enclosure for a smaller snake, you can't just buy everything to make that bioactive enclosure and then put the snake in with it. It's not going to work. You're going to have to spend months building that bioactive environment, making sure everything's right, making sure that your isopods and everything are not dying, making sure you have the right soils and everything, and that your plants set root. Because if your plants don't set root, they won't be strong enough to withstand animals moving around in there. So it's important that you develop these strong plants and that you develop that environment first before putting a snake in it. I don't believe that bioactive is very good for beginners. You're better off starting off with Tupperware, bigger Tupperware, PVC or whatever, and then maybe building it on the side and doing it as a project, or having the two homes so that you can try it, and if it doesn't work, you put it in something else. Bioactive is a great idea, but there's so many things that could end up going wrong. So if you want to use it, you're gonna have to make sure that you really set it up first, and that takes time. Point number 5. Is your heart set on a certain snake? Because whatever snake is your favorite snake or your dream snake, I believe that you should save up to buy that snake. You shouldn't get like a cheap snake or a beginner snake and then think that later on you're gonna get the one you really want. Instead, save up your money and get the one you really want. You don't go and get a cheap dog and then later on get a $2,000 dog or something. No, people save up, they spend $2,000, $3,000 sometimes on a beautiful dog that's the dog that they want, and they get it. This happening with snakes all the time. Oh, what's a good beginner snake? What should I start off with? I really don't like that, because these animals are going to be with you for 30 to 40 years, so you should really consider that. And if the way that it looks doesn't matter to you so much and you just want a specific snake, then I would highly suggest that you rescue one, because there's so many snakes that need rescuing that aren't really taken care of properly, and then they show up on Kijiji or Craigslist or whatever, or you can even go check out your animal adoption centers to see if there's one that you could help out, because snakes that have gone through a rough time and been mistreated, any animals that do, when you go and you take them and you take care of them and you give them a good life, often you'll have a better relationship with that snake than you would have with any other, because they've been through a rough time. You become the person that does good things for them, and they appreciate you for that. Same thing with a dog or cat. Most of the time we don't need to go and buy these, as I said, $2,000, $3,000 dogs. There's tons of them in the, is it called a pound? In the animal rescue centers. I don't even know what they're called, but there you can go and pick up one that has been neglected, and then you can take care of that one and give it a good life. If you're not have your eye set on a specific really, beautiful animal, then just do that. Go rescue one. The snake will appreciate it and you'll have such a great time with it. Number 6, are you going to meet the animal? Because sometimes you're going to buy an animal online and you don't get to meet it. But if you are buying locally, you should go and meet the snake. One of my pet peeves is people just asking me for a list of availability. You don't ask the pet store for a list of availability. You go and you feel them and you check them out, or at least you look at them. And then if you're serious about getting one, then you can do a little bit of handling if a breeder will let you. I personally really like when people come over and they get to experience snakes, maybe even for the first time with me, and I let them hold different ones so they can get a feel for what they like. Do you like the little ones more? Do you like the bigger ones more? And every single snake has a different personality. So for you to actually get a snake somewhere local, that's the way to do it. Go meet the snake, hold the snake, and you'll hold different ones, and then one of them clicks with you and you're like, this is the one. And that's the best way to do it. If you don't do that, and you're just ordering online or whatever, are you going to be ready to take the time to tame that animal if it's not tame? And know that if it's an older animal, it'll end up being way harder than working with a baby. If you get a baby, are you going to be willing to take a few bites and go through the process of getting that snake to be used to you, to be okay with you? Because if you're not, then you shouldn't get a snake. Number 7, do you have a vet or someone with a lot of experience that's going to be able to help you if you have issues? Breeders that have been dealing with snakes for a long time, and the person that you are buying the snake off might be able to help you with most things, with many problems, but once in a while there could be some sort of issue that a breeder's not going to be able to help you with, or your friends aren't going to be able to help you with. In this case, you want to make sure that you have a vet nearby, that you have accessible, and even better, you should kind of set up that relationship right when you get the snake. Because if you're going to have an animal, you're going to want to be able to deal with whatever problems come along. So make sure that you have a vet that's accessible, that you can talk to, build a relationship. You can take your snake in for a yearly checkup if you want to. That's kind of a nice thing to do. And try to maintain a good relationship with the person that sold you the snake. Try not to buy a snake off someone that's just going to get rid of it. If you have experience with snakes and stuff, then it's fine for you to get a snake maybe off Kijiji or Craigslist and know that it might not be in the best condition. But if it's your first snake, you really want to get off a breeder. Because if you get from a breeder, that breeder's worked with the animals, they have the experience hopefully, and then you have a relationship and they'll be able to help you along your journey. There's so many people that have bought snakes off me, even not bought snakes off me, asked me for help, and I've been able to help them sort out their problems. So you want to have someone like that. And if you ever have a question, need some help, feel free to ask me in the comments. I reply to all of them. Number 8. So you're getting an animal, you got to make sure that you have a food supply. Is there a pet store that you're going to be able to get food? Are you going to breed your own food? Are you going to get it off a breeder that breeds feeders? A breeder feeder, feeder breeder. You got to make sure. It seems like a silly thing, but what happens if you get a snake and then you're somewhere where the nearest pet store is an hour away or further than that? Can you find some other places that you can give your snake a little bit of variety? Maybe you can feed him birds sometimes. Mice, rats, rabbits, guinea pigs. Try different things. It's fine. Sometimes people say that you should just kind of stick to one thing and it might not, they'll get stuck on one thing. I've found that by giving snakes a variety of food, they'll almost always eat just about everything and they'll never stop eating one thing to eat another. I've never found a snake that was just stuck on one type of food. I have had a snake that doesn't want to stop eating live and basically doesn't want to eat anything else. And that's usually one of my last resorts. I don't really want to feed any of my snakes live. Right now, in a collection of over 100 reptiles, I have one snake that just will not eat frozen thawed. So are you ready to deal with that? Also make sure that your snake is eating frozen thawed. Lots of breeders like to just toss in live because it's easy for them and then they don't have to go through the process of freezing and stocking up and everything. So when you get a snake from a breeder, have they taken the time to get their snakes on frozen thawed? And also consider that if the breeder's done all this stuff and socialized the snake for you and got the snake on frozen thawed, then understand that you should appreciate that and respect it a little bit and be willing to pay a little bit more for that animal that was taken good care of. Because lots of the time the snakes that you get from pet stores, they're just sitting there, they're getting fed, they're not really getting all that interaction, and they might not be on frozen thawed, and they might be wild caught, and they might not be socialized. So consider all those things. Number 9, substrate. We're in an era where lots of people are pro-naturalistic and giving the animals everything from the wild and whatever. But when you bring a snake home, especially a baby or a young snake, they're weaker. They're more susceptible to things. And if you have substrate in that home, there are all sorts of problems that can happen that would never be a problem or happen without substrate. So sorry, but I don't think that you should put your snakes on substrate at the beginning, at least not when they're babies. If that substrate is dry, you get dust sometimes. The dust can get into their lungs and cause them infections. If the substrate is too wet, then they can end up getting mold, and then mold creates spores, which can cause problems and infections. If you don't clean the substrate properly, like they pee or something and you don't get all of it out, then you're gonna end up having urate or bacteria stuck in there too, and then that can cause problems. You can have little chips of the substrate stuck in underneath their scales. It could get into their butthole, cloaca, and it can cause problems that way. When they're eating, they could swallow a pile of substrate and then get impacted. Too much humidity, problems. So you see, like, there's those 6 problems that you can have with substrate that you're not going to have if you don't have substrate. Later on, if you want to mess around with substrate, go for it, but as a beginner, I do not suggest substrate. Bonus side note. Lots of people will make a fuss about having substrate, but I would say instead, giving them substrate so that they can feel and it's nice and it's more natural. Give them dowels across their home. like a dowel is like a thing that the snake can perch on. So if you've seen green tree pythons or tree snakes, they're usually kept with perches, but lots of people don't give their boas or their ball pythons perches. If you put perches inside your snake home, that's going to give them exercise. They're going to use it, they're going to climb. So you should find a way to put perches inside your snake home. And to me, that will be a lot more beneficial for them, useful, better exercise, more natural than giving them substrate. Number 10, heating. You're going to have to make sure that your heating is on point. Don't measure the heat on the hot spot, measure it like on the surface of the warm area. You need to use one of these guys. Instead of just having a normal thermometer thing, having the laser one, you can point, you can check the areas, you can see what your ambient temperature is, you can see what your hot spot is. I have an extra one, so if you want this one, tell me in the comments below, just say I want it, and if you are the chosen winner, I will ship it to you, but you will pay for shipping. And I'm in Canada, so if you're in the States, it might cost a bit more. But yeah, you can win it. It can be yours. Consider hot spots also annually. So for instance, for me, I like to keep about an 88 to 90 degree hot spot for most of my snakes during the summer. And then when winter comes, I like to keep a hot spot of around 92 to 94 degrees. And that's just what I find works for me. You can play around with that and see what happens for you. In the wild, when a snake goes and sits on a rock, it's not always the same temperature. They deal with varying temperatures. So if our temperatures vary a little bit, that's okay. But just keep an eye on your snake. See if anything's, going wrong. See if they seem to like it a bit more when it's warmer. See if they like it a bit more when it's cooler. Once again, with the whole bioactive people and wanting to keep things as natural as possible, the best thing to keep them under is halogen lights and heat them from the heat of the light, just like they get the heat from the sun. But now, if you're not doing that properly, that light is going to heat up that enclosure and it's going to remove all the humidity, and then you're going to have problems. So if you're not ready to do all that properly, like here's the thing, you do it properly or you don't. If you use a heat mat or a radiant heat and it does it properly, that's going to be better than using a light and not doing it properly. So do your research once again, and if you want to give them the fancy setup with the best conditions you can, do that research. I believe there's a Facebook page called Reptile Lighting, and you can learn about UVV, heating, and all that stuff. But if you're not going to do it that way, then make sure you have a good heat mat with a good thermostat. Thermostat, it's one of the most important tools, so don't go cheap on it. Buying a Herpstat is one of the best things I've ever done. I got a Herpstat 6 and it's been working for 10 years perfectly. And the big difference between the Herpstats and most of the other thermostats is that most thermostats turn on and off. So they're constantly turning on and off. They go to that temperature, then they turn off, and the heat drops, and then they turn on, and they're constantly turning on and off. With the Herpstats, they're on a dim proportional, I think it's called a proportional or a dim type heater. So what it means is they're keeping that temperature. So if the room goes a little bit cold, they automatically get a little bit warmer. If the room gets warmer, they automatically get a bit lower. So they're always providing a constant amount of heat or less heat, and it's adjusting accordingly. So that's why Herpstats are the best, and I'll have links to them below. Amazon, Canada, and everywhere else. You can use those. And if you do, it costs no more to you, but that would actually help support me. And those are the best thermostats you can get. You buy one, it's going to last you forever. It's solid quality. Don't go and get the cheap ones, because if they break, your snakes can die. And you're planning to have your snakes for 30, 40 years, so why not get something quality? And now we've done all 10, but we have a bonus. Thank you for staying. And this is one of the most important things that I think is overlooked, and that is humidity. So going back to the thought of substrate to boost humidity, you're spraying the enclosure, you're getting the substrate wet, and that's keeping it moist for longer. Humidity from spraying versus humidity in the air, there's a difference. There's quite a big difference. If you think about licking your lips get dry after you lick them. They don't stay moist and nice the rest of the day. In the same way, when you're spraying your snakes and you think that that's great, you're getting them wet, and then after it's drying them. On the other hand, if you have a humidifier and you have the air in that room at a good temperature, good humidity, then you're doing good. Another thing you can do is kind of make yourself a hose that goes from a humidifier and plugs into the reptile home. And that way you can control the humidity of the reptile home with the humidifier. And a humidifier is better than doing that than a Reptifogger. There's reptile companies that make these fogging machines and they're absolutely garbage. They break within a year. So get a good humidifier that actually checks the amount of humidity in the room, and it'll maintain it at like 60–70%. Usually around, I find 60 to 75% is perfect humidity for most snakes, but you have to do your research for that. Anyways, I hope this helped you, and I hope that you really consider all these things before getting a snake. They can make wonderful pets, and they can be with you as great friends for a long time, but you really got to make sure that you think and consider all of these things. If you have a friend that's about to get one, or you know someone that wants to, share this video with them. And thank you so much for giving me your time. Smash the like button and subscribe. I specialize in keeping boas. If you want to learn more about boa constrictors, check out this video.